Okay, I think we can get started. So I'm George. I'm a senior product manager for the App Builder team, and I have Andy or Andrea, who's based out of Uruguay. And
Hey.
while I'm sitting, hi Andy. So while I'm welcoming spring, she is welcoming, winter. That's how polar apart we are across the equator. Uh, and in today's session, we are just going to talk about mastering layouts in App Builder, but this is applicable to whether you're building any kind of web apps, whether it's Blazor or Angular. The concepts we're going to show you today are going to be exactly the same. We're going to keep the sessions short and sweet. There's not too much slides to show you, and the agenda items are the first part I'll be covering, where I'll just introduce you to the basics of app layouts in Flexbox, because App Builder uses that natively. And this is something which is supported by all the browsers out there. So everything I'm going to show you today as the Flex Layout basics, they are standardized. That means if you look up a reference on some website teaching you Flex Layout separately, they are all applicable inside of App Builder. And the second part of our session, Andy is going to jump in and she's going to show you how you can take the Flexbox concepts and take it to the next level in terms of how you can use it to achieve responsive layouts. So if everything sounds good till now, I'll just jump in straight into my demo. Okay, so in my part, I'm going to be covering a lot of the basic concepts, right? And these are the agenda items which are part of my presentation, and I've just created them here just to keep myself honest and on time. So let's first start with the basic building blocks of flex layouts, which are what we call row or column layouts. In terms of flex boxes, it doesn't really matter because you can set anything to row or column. So the example you're seeing here is just an example of 3 cards which I have set on the surface. And just by its orientation, you can tell that they are actually flowing in the row direction, which is why this is actually set to a row layout. If I show you how this was achieved, I switch back to my editor here. And you can see this is actually a layout container which predetermines how the child elements which are inside it need to flow. So because I've set it to row layout, when you see the properties area here, you can see that the row area is selected. And then I can actually switch to a different layout called column layout, and that will actually change the orientation of how these items are being actually stacked. Both these row layouts and column layouts, they're actually available as a layout component inside the toolbox area. So when you drag and drop a column layout, basically it's adding a layout and it's pre-selecting whether it's a row or a column, right? So it's basically the same thing. You can start at any particular point and you'll be able to get started with that stuff. So here, if I add another element here, you can see that it stacks on the row direction. And same thing, if I switch back on the parent to a column layout, it's actually added on the very bottom because it's set into a column layout. So that's the very basics of row and column layout. So naturally, because the session is short and sweet, we will do more of these sessions. So it's not going to be a super exhaustive stuff, but we will try to cover as much as we can. Let me switch back to my presentation here. The next thing you need to understand with this row and column layout is this whole notion of grow and shrink. And this is basically Flexbox's gift to us to say that don't worry about percentages. Let the content reflow based on how the browser window is adjusting, right? Because this is something which we don't control for our end users, is that they are actually going to use it on a web browser. So we don't know upfront what the size would be. And percentages are great for a while, but Flexbox actually calculates a lot of things for us. So as much as we can maximize that, it's better for us. So in order for us to adjust how grow and shrink works, the one thing you need to understand is that grow and shrink is always working in the direction of the row layout or column layout. So for example, this particular parent layout is actually set to row. So when I say grow or shrink, it is actually going to in the same direction of the column layout of the layout itself. So let me give one quick second here. So if I select this element here in my row layout, and if I set it to grow, you can see that there is this empty space, and grow is basically telling Flexbox that if you find any empty space, give it to this particular container. And that's what it's doing. So I hit grow on it, and it just flexes itself out and takes the available space on that particular canvas without me actually having to set a width of 100%, which is just would not work well in the calculations when there are margins or concepts like that involved. So all you need to understand is you want something to take all its space, and it's a row layout. You just hit grow, it'll just take the available space, right? The other thing we need to control is how do I position things within the canvas. If you're coming from an absolutely positioned environment, it is just very easy to just drag and drop something and it just positions itself wherever you dropped it. But Flex also takes care of this for us to some degree. And if I show you how this thing is available here, is I have it as centered vertically and horizontally on this particular canvas, right? Same thing for horizontal layout. It's set horizontally or vertically on the canvas. And if I want to change its positioning, what I can do is always go into my layout settings here and say, I want you on the top, or I want you horizontally on the left. And Flex is actually taking care of positioning these things for you, right? Similarly, if I want to center it, which is what this whole thing was originally set as. So if I go to centering my content, I can just do the same thing. I can go to my vertically align, center, horizontally align, center. And with this, you should be able to have full control over where the group of components are actually ending up. But there is also a way in which I can make one of these elements, one of the child elements, break away from what the parent is dictating, like a rebellious kid out here. So I can select one of these elements here. And if I look into its setting, there's its individual alignment setting available for one element. So I can select that one element and say, you go to the top, or you can go to the bottom, and it can break the pattern based on what you want to do for one specific UI element, saying that, hey, you break away from the pack. But the only thing you need to consider is this alignment will only work on the opposing axis. So this is if it's a row layout, which is going left to right, this self-align would only work on the vertical axis. It'll just go up or down. So I can select this guy here. I can say top. And now I have individualized control. By default, it is actually set to auto, right? So this is the same thing as auto. And I can always multi-select and do it in bulk. And a more meaningful use case of this centering, which I was showing you earlier, is say that I have this sign-in dialog, and it is right now positioned in its default layout, where it's saying, okay, it's set to stretch vertically, or all the child elements, and horizontally it's supposed to align to the left. But if I want to center this dialog, which as you would all expect, I will not be changing the element itself, but I'll be adjusting it on the parent. So I would just set it to center, and center. And now I have my dialog positioned nicely in the center of the dialog, right? Now there is another concept in web, which is positioning, which is not just about how all the children are positioned. I might also have scenarios where I want to position something fixed to the browser Chrome, or fixed based on its parent. And a very good example of that is, say, this help resource button. If you see, if I adjust the window, it'll always stay plugged in exactly where I left it. And in order to do that, there is this position property explicitly available inside the toolbox. And the only ones we commonly care about is absolute or fixed. And we have some brief explanations which would show up based on how you want to use it. So if I want to set something to a fixed layout, I select fixed for this particular element. And now it's giving me a positional space, like how do you want it to be fixed? So what I can do in this case, I can just say, this is unset, because I want to position it to the bottom right corner. And then I can come in here and can say 0 pixel. 0 pixel. And I don't actually have to worry about, the fact that this is going to stay exactly where I left it, right? So if I want to do it even more quickly, say that I positioned it, I said this is fixed right now, but I can always go in and say, go bottom, go to the right edge, and it's doing the same setting which I was doing earlier, right? So this is another way you can position elements, but you would do it for very specific scenarios where you really want some UI element not to be affected by the scrolling of the page or resizing of the page. You always want it plugged to the very corner of the screen. Then fixed is your go-to technique. Then I get this whole notion of spacing, right? And spacing is available to you in at least 3 ways. And here you can see 3 layouts, and all of them have different sizing or spacing applied to it. So for the first one, you can see this green highlight. This is referring to the padding which I have applied on this particular content here. And the padding is determining if I change this value to 64, you can see that it grows to accommodate that particular content. And this is how you're spacing all the children away from the boundary of that particular box. For this particular example is what was set for 64. And in this one, it's set to 32. But there's another bit of spacing which would really save you a lot of time and not have to worry about margins and paddings, is that the Flexbox container itself has something called a gap. And you can think of gap as like adding a gutter, right, in your designs. So you can actually just set this value. And in this case, it's set to 16 pixels. And this one is set to 32 pixels. And if I adjust that value to 64, you can say that any element which is added in here would be spaced with that in mind. So if I copy and paste this multiple times, it's not a problem. It just takes care of it. Then there is a scenario of what Flexbox allows is to wrap content. And wrapping is very useful in scenarios like this. Here it's set to a row content. And I have this card here, which is repeated based on data. And you can see that it's just going off my visible area, right? So if I preview it, you can see that I cannot see the elements in here because they are scrolled all the way to the end. What I can do is I can go to the parent and just enable wrap. And just like that, it basically takes care of how I want this UI to really look like. And it actually works well if you also understand this notion of overflow. And in the overflow settings, I can determine how I want the scroll bars to appear, right? So in this case, I have it turned to overflow auto. Then there is hidden, where it will never show you what's going off screen. Automatic will automatically determine where the scroll should actually show up. And just like in the previous example, if I enable wrapping, you can see that because it's auto, the scroll bars automatically show up on the right. So now if I go and look at this sample, it's perfect. This is exactly how I want it. And this is all taken care of with Flex itself. And finally, I want you to let you know that even though we're talking about these structures which are just sitting nicely next to each other, the real design is about nesting these kind of components in a meaningful way. And that's the final thing I want to show you before I hand it to Andy, is here I have a design which is available inside your sample apps area. And what I want you to do is take like 10 seconds to understand how might you create this using this concepts I just showed you of row layouts and column layouts. All right. So here I'll show you what I looked at in terms of the structure. Now I'm exposing to you the innards of it and showing you how these layouts actually work with each other, how grow and shrink would actually work with each other. And everything you see as a purple kind of container or the boundary I have drawn, that's actually a column layout, which determines that this nav bar stays on top. And under it, I have added a blue one, which is actually a row. And then in the same manner, I have added another row inside it, a component, a row layout, and inside that I'm adding again column layouts, 3 column layouts. And this is how I'm nesting these layouts in order to get the look and feel I need. I'll show you another quick example, and then I'll hand it over to Andy. This is another design. which looks pretty complex, but it's still a bunch of rows and columns pulled together. So if I show you the structure directly, here you can see that it has the same concept. I have a column layout. Inside that, I have added row layouts. And again, I'm nesting a column, row. And then with this kind of an approach, I'm able to build any kind of fluid structures with App Builder. Now, naturally, we have a faster way for you to get started with these layouts. And that is the portion Andy is going to now show you in terms of what is available to the designers.
Hello, everyone.
Okay, good.
I'm Andy, and I'll be showing you the layouts that are the structure that you can pick whenever you create a new page here, a child view. Whenever you create a new page, you can pick a layout or build it yourself. So if you click on the button here, we provide some layouts that we built. Popular structures that we found are useful when building applications or websites. So we have some horizontal splits of the page. We have some vertical here, and some of the others are have fixed panels on the left or on the right, and the rest of the content is fluid. So we have different options for you to pick, and it covers a lot of scenarios. So I'm going to show you how to rebuild 2 of these from scratch. So let's pick this one to start. This is a layout that has the left side fluid and the right side fixed. For this layout, we have a column on the left and a column on the right with 3 inner containers, like nested layouts, like George said. For this one, we are using percentages as the width of the fixed panel. Okay, so I'm going to show you how to rebuild this quickly. I'm going to delete. And instead of picking one, I'm just going to add the containers myself. So we have 2 column layouts. And then we turn on grow, everything like George explained before. I'm going to be reusing it now. And in here, I'm going to add more containers, the inner ones. You can add from here, from the toolbox, or you can add by clicking Control E, like it says here, or Command E. And I'll be using that all the time. So, because it speeds up my work. I turn grow, so they fill the space, and I almost have my layout done. I only need to change the percentage here. In here, in the width, you can just type 35%, which was the original width, and it's there. So I have the layout done. I'm just going to show you how the spacing is working and how it's adapting the sizes when the browser changes its size. I'm going to give it some padding. And I have some fake containers that I'm using here just to show you how everything is working. Okay, sorry. And that's it. Now it's recreated. It's adaptive. I'm going to show you in the next example how to make this act responsive. Okay. A similar application that we have in one of our sample apps uses this layout a little bit more differently. So I'm going to show you how to rebuild this too. We are not using percentage on this one. The right side is fixed, and the left side, as you can see, it's adapting and stretching and showing more or less content. So I want to show you how to rebuild this using a similar layout to the previous one. Instead of percentage, we're going to be using something else, the grow property. So I'm going to do the same, build a column. I copy paste, so I have 2 columns and enable grow. I'm going to add padding and gap. Same thing, I'm going to use these elements to show you where everything goes. And now we have the basic structure. Now, like I showed you, this side is smaller, but it doesn't have a fixed width. It has a minimum width. So, and this one is taking 4 times as much available space. In order to tell the container to do that, in here on the resize property, instead of just having grow and shrink enabled like this, I'm going to use that custom value, and I'm going to say grow it 4 times. So take us 4 times as available space as it is, there is. So that's what it's doing. So if we preview what's happening now, is that, but if you actually had real content, you wouldn't be seeing the content like this size because it's too small. So I'm going to give the containers, the parent ones, some minimum widths. And in preparation for enabling the responsive behavior too. Because in order for the containers to stack on top of each other to become responsive, they need to have minimum sizing. So whenever they reach that sizing, they stack. So I gave them the minimum width. And now in order, I need to enable something else, which is on the canvas that contains all of the containers. I need to set wrapping to wrap, and then change the content alignment to stretch so that it fills the screen again. So hopefully it's already working, and yes, you can see they're stacking below the desktop size. It works the same if you resize the browser. And now I'm going to show you another layout that is simpler. This one doesn't have any percentages or anything. It's a simpler one. It's this one. This one has 2 rows on top of each other, and the bottom one has 2 nested ones, nested containers. It could be rows or columns. So I'm gonna rebuild this real quick because this one is very easy. And after what George explained and what I explained, you should be able to build it in no time too. So I have 2 row layouts. The canvas is a column, of course. I enable grow, and on the bottom one, I'm gonna add 2 columns with grow. And that's pretty much it. Like the others, I'll show you how they look with my fake content. Just so you can see it. And there it is. This is not responsive yet. I'm going to show you how to do that in the next example where we apply this layout to an actual sample that we have. This is another one of our sample applications. When you create a new app in App Builder, you get to pick from blank applications or templates, or you can pick any of our sample apps, and this is the newest one. It's pretty simple, and what's pretty cool is that it has very nice stacking working. It could work up to a phone size. So I want to show you how to recreate this. It kind of uses the same layout, so I'm gonna recreate it quickly again because it's so fast to recreate it. Like I said, the parent, the canvas has to be set to column. So I have a row on top, a row on bottom, enable grow, and 2 columns. And on the top part, I have these blocks, colorful blocks. I already have them here. So I'm gonna copy them and paste them on top. I need to space them out. So I'm going to add the gap here and some padding too. And I'm gonna add padding and gap here because I forgot to. I don't know if you noticed, but I'm using all the time multi-selection to edit the same properties. So right now I have the top row and the bottom one, the bottom columns selected, and I can change share properties at the same time, and it applies to all of them. It works very nice. So the top one does not have to be so tall because in the real app, the content is very little. So I'm just gonna give it a minimum. I'm gonna disable the grow and the shrink and give it a minimum height. And the bottom one has this content, a list and some text. So I'll add a text. And a list. And then we have a list. I have my list. I'm just gonna add like more list items, so it looks like it's populated with more data. I'm gonna delete the second column and just copy paste this one because they're exactly the same. I didn't add a gap to the outer row layout that contains these two columns, so I'm gonna add it. And now everything should stack. I mean, it shouldn't stack. Everything should just behave adaptively. But we don't want that. We want it to be responsive. So we need to add some minimum width to all of the containers in order to enable prepare for the stacking. So the top ones are going to have a minimum width, and the bottom ones too. And if you don't remember, we need to enable the wrapping too on this one, on the top and the bottom one. So on the top one, we enable wrap. We change the content alignment, and on the bottom one, containing the two columns, we need to do the same, wrap and stretch. And now, if I'm not mistaken, it should be working perfectly. So as you can see, with a few layouts and a few tweaks to the sizing, the minimum sizing, the growth settings, you can achieve responsiveness pretty easily with a few clicks, and it's going to take your app to the next level. So that's it for me.
Thanks, Andy. I was trying to manage the chats, and I realized that some people may not be familiar with what App Builder really represents. And I would really advise you to just check out, go to infogistics.com, and under design and development, you can go to App Builder. And this basically presents the entire story of what App Builder actually represents. It is really a SaaS solution which allows you to go from design to actual code. And when we talk about design to code, is everything which Andy is showing on her screen or what I was showing on my screen. I can hit preview. So let me just share my screen for a brief second here. So this is the App Builder web page, and you can see that it really provides you code generation as the final output. It's not just about creating designs and being happy about what you've created. Is that even for this example, which I was showing you here?
Your screen.
Not yet. Okay.
No.
Thank you. So this was the app I was actually showing you earlier, right? I was going through this navigation. I was showing you all these different layouts. But the real kicker for App Builder is if I enable the code view, you can see that it's actually generating the application code for your app. And all these navigation elements, this routing for single page web apps, it's actually being handled by App Builder with binding for data binding to data sources and everything you can expect what you want a professional app to have. And even components like our grid, which is what it's like a star component in our toolbox. So if I add a new view and if I add a grid component, you can see that this grid is super performant, bound to data, and it has these tons of features which you would need for a line of business performance business application. And once you're done designing everything, you can just publish your app to GitHub to see the entire source code which is generated by App Builder, and then open it up in your IDE and continue with that story, because everything we show inside the toolbox here, because we have tons of components like let me just kill the grid here and open chart. This is a data bound chart, and we have properties which allows you to do most of the common scenarios for creating your charts, and it's bound to sources like a RESTful API in order to do this. And the code we end up generating, it is generating using a developer UI toolkit specifically for Angular or Blazor or web components. And you decide at any point in time what platform are you actually targeting, and you just pick, I want Blazor WebAssembly, Blazor Server, and you just publish or download, and then you can compile this particular application on your IDE. And our promise is that when you actually look at this particular application inside after compiling, it'll look exactly like what we have it in the preview here. And I don't have time to go over the theming story, but everything I'm doing here, it is themed at a global level, as a design system level. So things like input fields, or if you pick a Fluent style, so if I show you here, you can actually change these parameters on your theme and be able to adjust it globally across your application. So I just wanted to make sure that I highlight that. Also in the chat, and we will share these as links, when we send you the follow-up communication, is that we have this playlist, and we do these webinars on a regular basis. This one just happens to be about layouts, which is why you didn't hear about everything App Builder does. But maybe I should have started with this and stolen like 5 minutes to do this. But here you can see theming, how do you actually deploy applications, connecting to SQL Server with RESTful APIs. All of this stuff is available as part of our past webinars, and you should be able to pick and choose what actually suits your fancy. So with that, I'm going to make sure, is the grid responsive? One of the questions here. Well, it's responsive because you control how many columns you're actually showing inside your grid. And then it is only responsive to a certain degree because it's still a grid, right? So if you really want to make it work on mobile, it is natural that you only see a set number of columns on your grid, and then you have to scroll to see the remaining columns. But you should not be pumping a huge grid onto a mobile phone anyway. But since we support data binding, you can always create a custom list, bind the relevant items for your phone, and just use that as your phone representation. So I'm going to end this.
There's another question from Anthony.
Yeah.
That's a good one. A bit above.
Can I see an example of how controls such as text boxes, drop downs, and how you can control it? No. So Anthony, none of those components which I was showing, well, let me just pick my kitchen sink app, which has all of those things. So if I go to my webinar assets, components, Fluent, yeah, this is good. So none of these components, the components itself, when they're sitting on the canvas, can need flex settings, but the components by itself, so let me pick inputs. These are all the components which are coming in the toolbox. So you have, the ability to do prefix and suffix and add icons to it, text boxes, range sliders. All of these things are flex child items. So they are actually positioned on the canvas inside a container, and then it can have flex settings if you want it to have, like it can have its own margin settings or paddings. But for the most part, the components are kind of self-contained, right? So if I show you another example you asked me was for select or pickers. So here I have a picker. This thing is handled inside the app builder itself, but you can actually decide what are the items of your drop down and so on. So I would really, this is a combo box, which actually allows you to multi-select, and it's bound to data. You determine what should show as the display here and what should be set as the value, and then it takes care of it. And this is an example of a drop down, which I have actually created on App Builder itself. I may not have time to show you a deep dive of this thing, but reach out to our team here in Phlogistics and let us know what else you would like to see in more detail. Because usually this is what I end up showing for a lot of the webinars, like all the chart types we have, the capabilities of data grid, the repeating list, all of this stuff with data binding and what the code looks like. So App Builder is a lot more than what I was showing you as part of layouts. This webinar or accelerator was just focused on layouts. That's all. All right. I'm going to go ahead and end this accelerator for today, and I hopefully will see you for the next one. Take care. Bye.
Bye, everyone.